Hello and welcome to Our American States, a podcast from the National Conference of State Legislatures. I'm your host, Ed Smith.
Our team is currently tracking over 400 pieces of legislation just for 2024 alone, demonstrating how busy legislators have been discussing and contemplating how to regulate AI.
That was Chelsea Canada from NCSL, who tracks state legislation around the country related to artificial intelligence. She's one of three guests on this episode. My other guests are Alaska Senator Shelley Hughes and Colorado Representative Manny Rutenow. AI, most broadly thought of as the use of computer systems to perform tasks that normally require human intelligence, is being employed in a wide array of ways, from self-driving cars to healthcare. But concerns about the potential misuse and unintended consequences of AI are prompting legislatures around the country to study the issue and, in many cases, pass legislation. In the 2024 legislative session, at least 45 states, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and Washington, D.C., introduced AI bills. 31 states, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands adopted resolutions or enacted legislation. Chelsea explained the breadth of the legislation proposed in the states and also noted the trend in some states toward comprehensive AI laws focused on consumer protection. Senator Hughes recounted her experience in Alaska advancing a comprehensive bill, which did not pass in 2024, but she plans to bring it back in the next session. In Colorado, Representative Rutenow emphasized the focus on protecting consumers from harm and discrimination from AI without stifling the technology. Here's our discussion, starting with Chelsea. Chelsea, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Ed, for having me. I'm excited for this timely conversation.
Yeah, this is a fascinating topic, and the technological developments around AI seem to just move with dizzying speed. And I think this has been going on for a long while, but the emergence of generative AI really caught the attention of a wider public. And you've been tracking all this in legislatures, and tell listeners how lawmakers have been responding, what they've been thinking about.
Yeah, sure, Ed. Currently, there's no major federal legislation enactments focused on regulating AI use and or protecting people from the potential harms of AI and other automated systems. And because of this, state legislatures are moving ahead to address potential harms from these technologies. As you mentioned, at NCSL, our team is currently tracking over 400 pieces of legislation just for 2024 alone, demonstrating how busy legislators have been discussing and contemplating how to regulate AI. From what we've seen, bipartisan efforts in state legislatures seek to find a balance between protections for citizens while also enabling innovation in state government services and the commercial use of AI. Legislation has pointed to evidence of use across state government, and we've heard from legislative staff that legislatures are also contemplating how to use the technology within their own operations.
Well, it's certainly not the first time state legislatures have been ahead of the federal government on a topic. Obviously, AI applies to an awful lot of different areas. What are legislators particularly focused on?
Well, like I mentioned, at NCSL, we've tracked AI-specific legislation since 2019. And in that time, we've seen each year the amount of bills introduced continues to increase. Those number of categories specifying types of AI legislation, though, has jumped from year to year. Currently, we're seeing 23 different areas that we're currently tracking, demonstrating the various strategies legislators are contemplating, which continues to grow. So some of those categories include government use, private sector use, education use, responsible or ethical use of AI, notification and disclosure requirements, provenance issues for the training of data, use of AI in the commission of crimes, and even whether an AI system can be considered or granted status as a person. Enactments of legislation have mainly been around studying AI and its use, government use, and we've seen a few targeted areas such as elections and other types of prohibited synthetic content. 3 states so far have passed comprehensive AI laws that focus on safety and consumer protection, which is a highlight in the news right now.
Well, not surprising, there's so many different areas they're looking at given the many different areas AI applies to, but let's drill down a little bit about enactments around comprehensive AI laws that focus on consumer protection. Can you tell us a little bit more about those?
Sure. Like I mentioned, most of the legislation currently enacted focus on government use or very targeted instances of AI use. But many states have been interested in regulating AI in the private sector, as evidenced by things like task forces and other groups charged with investigating and recommending how to actually do this. This year, 3 states, Utah, Colorado, and California, reached outside of government to regulate AI within the private sector. Utah's Artificial Intelligence Policy Act imposes disclosure obligations on covered entities around their use of generative AI technologies. Following Utah, Colorado passed its own comprehensive AI legislation. SB 205 imposes a wider range of obligations on both developers and deployers of certain AI systems, focused primarily on algorithmic discrimination and artificial intelligence systems that make consequential decisions within areas like education, employment, financial or lending services, essential government services, healthcare services, and more. Just recently, California passed SB 1047, and it's now awaiting the governor's signature, so it's still unknown at this time if it'll make it over the finish line. The bill aims to add new requirements to the development of large AI models by setting out various testing, safety, and enforcement standards with the consumer in mind.
So these seem to fall, I think, on the regulatory side of the ledger. Are there other proposals, enactments, legislation about contributing to the design and development of AI, sort of encouragement of it?
Absolutely. Thanks for bringing that up, Ed. There's several bills that encourage the design and development of AI. Some initial examples that we've seen of this activity include funding to universities to build artificial intelligence expertise, funding for a Medicaid AI pilot program, and funding to a Department of Health to develop a customer service solution. West Virginia created a tax credit for high technology manufacturing businesses, including manufacturing machines that use artificial intelligence. And New Jersey recently created a tax credit to incentivize AI business development and large scale artificial intelligence data centers. The Utah legislation I mentioned earlier also creates the Artificial Intelligence Learning Laboratory Program, which is tasked with analyzing the risks and benefits of AI and aims to encourage the use of AI technologies in the state. Program participants can apply for regulatory mitigation to waive specific legal and regulatory requirements to test these technologies.
Well, it's so interesting. You mentioned the data center effort. We did a podcast about data centers just recently, and the amount of energy increase demand that is expected because of the advance of AI in them and the amount of power that takes. So more to come, I'm sure. And on that topic, we've talked about the trends we're seeing so far. Can you look in your crystal ball and give us any sense of maybe what the next couple of years are going to look like?
You're right on the target, Ed. We only expect to see more legislation, actually much, much more. And while I don't have a crystal ball, we do anticipate other states will look to the recent consumer protection laws in Utah, Colorado, and in California if signed by the governor. Additionally, with all those AI government use bills that I was speaking towards earlier, a lot of the requirements within those bills ask for a study and recommendations on how to apply AI in state government and in some cases regulate AI in the private sector. And some of these studies are due soon, meaning legislators will glean insights from these recommendations and will decide what they want to do next.
Well, Chelsea, thanks so much for getting us up to speed on what the legislative landscape is on this topic, and I feel pretty confident that we're going to be talking again in the not too distant future about what's next. Take care.
Thanks. I look forward to it.
I'll be right back after this short break with Representative Routenell from Colorado.
When it comes to podcasts, only one organization, NCSL, keeps a focus on the people, policy, and politics of state legislatures. Each episode of our podcast offers behind-the-scenes insights into the legislative process. First, the program Our American States provides in-depth discussions twice a month on key state policy issues shaping our nation. Or explore bipartisan dialogue with our special series Across the Aisle, where diverse political perspectives converge to create constructive conversations in state legislative chambers. And for history buffs, we've also produced a 6-part series called Building Democracy, the Story of State Legislatures. Listen to learn more about the creation and development of the first branch of government in the United States. Stay connected, stay informed. Subscribe to these programs now on your favorite podcast platform. Learn more at ncsl.org.
Representative, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Ed. Really appreciate it.
So, Colorado is one of the first states in the U.S. to comprehensively regulate the development and deployment of high-risk AI systems. First, why did you decide to take on this topic? What attracted you to it?
Well, as you know, artificial intelligence is an increasingly powerful tool that has the potential to fully transform our lives in many positive ways. But it has to be developed and used ethically and responsibly. And I think our first-in-the-nation artificial intelligence law provides the necessary safeguards to protect workers, tenants, and other consumers from biased and unfair AI systems, which will hopefully allow the technology to grow more safely and sustainably. The whole point here is to ensure that the racism, sexism, ableism, and other forms of discrimination from our past aren't propagated into our future by hidden and powerful algorithms. And I think this bill is a crucial step toward making technology work for everyone and not just a privileged few.
Well, I think that we've all read a lot of news stories about AI incorporating the biases that already exist in society. And so it sounds like you're trying to find a way to stop that from proliferating. And I wonder if you could talk about what exactly the law does, what the folks here in Colorado, I'm here in Colorado as well as you, what we can expect and how this law will work out in our state. Yeah.
And first off, to your earlier point, it turns out that these AI algorithms are using the data from the past, from our often racist or sexist past, and propagating those decisions into our future. So it's a sort of garbage in, garbage out, racism in, racism out. And so that's what this law is trying to prevent. But broadly speaking, what this bill aims to do is to make sure that the developers and deployers of these high-risk AI systems use reasonable care to not cause algorithmic discrimination. And so what does that mean? Some ways that the developer or deployers can help meet that reasonable care standard is by ensuring that there's a risk management policy, that they do impact assessments of the high-risk AI systems, that they do annual reviews of the deployment of these high-risk AI systems to make sure that there isn't algorithmic discrimination going on. They should also have some transparency around notifying a consumer of specified items when a high-risk AI system is being used for the decisions for that consumer. So there's a bunch of transparency and assessments that the companies have to do to comply with the law.
So I think a lot of us who have watched the development of regulation around AI, one concern I think people have is that while we regulate the potential negative impacts, we don't stifle the creativity that may come along. Do you think this balances that out in your legislation?
Yeah, I think so. I think when any new technology comes in, especially one that has the potential to really upend our lives, we want to make sure that consumers have confidence in that technology so that they fully embrace it and use it in the ways that would bring about progress for themselves and for society as a whole. And so the whole point of this is to make sure that developers and deployers are acting in ways that accord with our values and in ways that allow for this technology to be used sustainably and productively into the far future.
One of the things I'm always fascinated by is the actual sausage making process of legislation, and particularly how you get people in the room so that all the stakeholders are represented. And what was your process like, and how did that influence what you finally ended up with?
When the legislation was first coming into its own at the beginning stages, there was a lot of work with legislators across the country. There are some folks in Connecticut that Senator Rodriguez, while the bill was still in the Senate, was working alongside legislators in Connecticut and other states to be able to come up with something that can be passed in multiple states to avoid a sort of patchwork response to this AI-related problem. And so the first step was to work alongside other state legislators and stakeholders across the country. And then once it got to the House, I started working even more so with stakeholders on the ground here in Colorado. So imagine workers' rights groups, folks that are representing civil rights organizations here in the state, and making sure that their needs were heard and that we incorporated their desires for the bill within the bill so that it balances the business interests alongside our need to protect civil rights for all Coloradans.
So I know that you have a law degree, but you also have a science background. And did that help you in sort of understanding AI and its potential manifestations? I think for a lot of legislators, probably this whole topic is kind of hard to wrap their arms around.
I think more so than my background in science and my legal background, I think just being exposed to this at an early age has helped me get to this issue in a much more dedicated way. I'm 29 years old now, but I've been hearing about the promise of artificial intelligence in all sorts of ways from a really early age. I've been working on the internet and with technology that's at the leading edge since I was as long as I can remember. And so that has allowed me to grapple with this a little bit better than I think I was expecting. But there's still a lot for me to learn and a lot for us to do as Colorado's legislative body to make sure that we're protecting all Coloradans.
Well, I think there's a lot to be said for being a digital native. As somebody who got his first cell phone when I think I was 43 or something, it's a big gap in terms of what people's experience are growing up. So as this law goes into effect, what can developers, deployers, consumers, can they expect to actually see things differently? Will there be signs that this law is in effect for them?
First off, I want to say that there's still a lot of this law that needs to get implemented administratively through the Attorney General's office, through rulemaking. And some of the things that will inform the Attorney General's office is the AI task force that we have in place. We brought in folks from different sectors, from healthcare, education, financial institutions, consumer protection, civil rights groups. All those folks are coming together in this AI task force to make sure that we iron out the details and make sure that we implement the best possible policy. But once that is the case, once the Attorney General takes this up and does their rulemaking on it, you can anticipate that consumers will be able to receive notification and transparency around when artificial intelligence models are being used to make really consequential decisions in their lives. And I think you can anticipate those consumers having a greater trust in the process so that when they submit their resume through a web portal that is going to use artificial intelligence, they have better faith in the institutions that are using their information and hopefully leveraging that information to make the best decision based on the merits as opposed through discriminatory practices. On the developer and deployer side, I think they're working alongside the AI task force. A lot of these deployers and developers are really interested to make sure that this bill is integrated in ways that feel fair to them. And I think they can anticipate greater regulatory clarity around what they require to do to be able to meet the standards of reasonable care within the bill.
What do you see in Colorado? Do you see additional legislation coming down the road, or is it more sort of a wait and see after this?
I think it's definitely likely that we'll be bringing additional legislation in Colorado. I think this bill does a great job at tackling some of the discriminatory aspects of artificial intelligence that we've been able to unearth. But artificial intelligence will be used in ways that extend into all facets of our lives. And one thing that I'm really interested in is making sure that artificial intelligence is used safely so that we don't have catastrophic risks against consumers or against public utility companies or against servers, so that these AI algorithms aren't used in ways that harm us on a societal level by allowing rogue actors to make biological weapons. And so I think that we can craft legislation to make sure that artificial intelligence is deployed in safe ways that include guardrails that allow us to be able to thrive alongside artificial intelligence as opposed to fear it.
Well, Representative, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us about this and share your experience in the Colorado legislature with this successful piece of legislation. And I know a lot of people are probably going to be looking at that around the country. Thanks a lot.
Appreciate your time, Ed. Thanks so much.
I'll be right back with Senator Shelley Hughes from Alaska.
How can state legislators, staff, and those interested in public policy stay ahead of the curve and keep up with state legislative trends? It's easy. Read NCSL State Legislative News every day and watch NCSL Town Halls. From education to healthcare, elections to taxes, infrastructure to criminal justice, we've got you covered. State Legislatures News is your go-to source for unbiased, comprehensive analysis on the issues that drive change. Each day, you can explore in-depth coverage on crucial policy debates, legislative innovations, and the latest developments in state legislatures. And enjoy profiles of state legislative leaders and prominent legislative staff, as well as discover insights to unique legislative districts across the country. And be sure to watch NCSL Town Halls, your trusted source for legislative insights. These live-streamed events provide timely, energetic, and brisk interviews with experts on key policy issues. Dive into the heartbeat of state politics with timely and insightful articles and interviews that matter. Get access today to State Legislatures News and NCSL Town Halls at ncsl.org/news.
Senator Hughes, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation. It is a very relevant one in this time in which we're living.
Well, that's a great way to kick things off because I'm always interested in what motivates lawmakers to pursue a particular topic. Can you tell the listeners what drew you to the AI issue, why you wanted to spend your time and effort on this?
Well, it goes back a number of years ago related to unmanned aircraft, actually, because that was a very innovative technology that people were worried about. They were worried about scary drones, whether they were large military drones, killing innocent women and children, or little ones that were spying on us. But because I'm from Alaska and aviation is an important part of our state, our economy, and our transportation system, when I was asked to introduce a bill to ban drones that was happening in other states, I said, I'm going to study this issue. And I realized it was a technology that could be used for good and that we should harness it for good and just work to prevent bad actors, which is exactly what I think about AI. And so because I was on the forefront of the unmanned aircraft industry, which is now a real part of our state, and we are ahead of the game on that, it was just the right thing, I think. I was drawn to learn about AI and to help usher it in a way that our people would be protected, but it would also be an opportunity to help our economy, help the workplace, and help particularly our state employees.
Well, it's so interesting how people come to these issues. Can you talk about the bill you introduced this year and what it would have accomplished?
Yeah, I just want to add to that because I started off in the technological field and really pushing for neutrality when it comes to technology. I was also the one appointed to our broadband task force and really pushed for technology neutrality in that arena not just broadband, but low Earth orbit satellite, laser technology, et cetera. So this was a natural progression. And your question again.
Yes, you're clearly steeped in these issues. So the bill you introduced this year, what would it have accomplished?
Yes, my bill SB 177 was the very first bill in Alaska to be introduced on the subject of artificial intelligence. It was designed to set the parameters for state government use of artificial intelligence to ensure citizens were protected, to make sure there was, it would allow streamlined work processes, but that it be done with transparency and guidelines, for instance, requiring human oversight, providing publicly posted inventory so individual Alaskans would know where and when artificial intelligence is being used, and that there be regular impact assessments so we could ensure that we were really reaping the benefits and we understood any liabilities, risks, and that there be accountability mechanisms in place at all times, particularly when it comes to biases, because there can be effects on individuals, whether it's their personal liberty or their finances, their livelihood, privacy. And when you think about decisions that are being made that can impact real lives, these are no small matters.
So tell listeners what happened with the bill and what you see now as the barriers to its passage.
Well, first of all, we in Alaska, we were in the second year of a 2-year cycle, so it was a bit late to introduce a brand new topic. And we did a lot of educating. There was tremendous interest. There were some saying that it might be the most important bill of the session, but ultimately we did not get it through. But we began the process, and that's very typical in our state, particularly on a new subject. I think that it was a combination of the timing, but also we did get some pushback from industry, which really surprised me because I sit on the task force with NCSL. So I've been listening to the national conversations for a couple of years where this has been a hot topic. And industry was telling us Congress is not going to get their act together and do anything on this. It's up to the states. And my philosophy has always been to welcome innovation, not restrict the development of the technology, and just looking really to safeguard, make sure that it's deployed appropriately. So my bill wasn't really telling industry what they had to do or not do. It was really on what state employees would need to do to make sure it was deployed properly. So I was kind of surprised that we got some pushback from technology toward the end, and it was just really too late in the session to deal with it all. So we've got the bill ready to go again in January.
Well, of course, most bills do not pass the first time, and that's why state lawmakers are such a persistent bunch. Tell us what conversations legislators are having around potential unintended consequences of AI technology.
Yes, I had an opportunity to speak at Stanford University on a panel about AI, and I shared the story that I was able to secure a meeting with Saul Khan, who's the founder of Khan Academy. And there is such phenomenal and great potential to help children learn. They've launched, I believe it's still in the test phase, Khan Amigo, which is a chatbot for children. And it's like having a personal tutor alongside that child, and the teacher at the front of the classroom just can't provide that one-on-one as the child's doing the math problem to see where the breakdown is occurring. So there's just a tremendous potential with that, helping with the learning and improving our kids in the areas of academics. But one of the concerns that I've raised there, and I raised with Mr. Khan, is the potential for use of a chatbot for small children who might have difficulty separating reality from fantasy and might form an unhealthy emotional, psychological, social bond with a robot, essentially, and it perhaps could impact relationships with humans. In other words, these chatbots are designed to really get to know the child as far as their likes and dislikes, and design the learning activities according to what would interest the child. And so you could see a chatbot's never going to be mean to you. It's always going to be nice. It's always going to be talking about things that interest you. And so you could see where that could happen. And we've had back over the decades, there was a Teddy Ruxpin teddy bear, in fact, where children were having emotional trauma if they were separated from this talking teddy bear. So that is my concern. And I have encouraged Khan Academy. They do tremendous amount of research on educational outcomes as far as what they deploy. But it's important, I believe they have a social responsibility to research any other psychological impacts. We have recently learned through the book Anxious Generation by Mr. Haidt that too much screen time is impacting teenagers as far as mental health, depression, suicide. So I certainly want to protect our young children. It can be a very good tool, but again, we're trying to harness these things for good and prevent harm.
Well, education is a great area to see how technology can cut both ways. Overall, what do you see as the role of legislators in regulating AI design, development, and deployment?
I would hesitate regulating design, except maybe when it comes to deepfake, that there be some kind of stamp that shows that a deepfake was made. But in general, for AI, I would allow the developers, the entrepreneurs, the inventors to do their thing. And then as far as deployment, that space is another conversation. And that's why I filed my bill, because I want to make sure that they're very careful as far as security, that they're very careful as far as consequential decision making, how they use AI. It is something that could streamline things. Right now, across the country, I know in our state, employers are having difficult time finding employees. And so streamlining could be very helpful in some of these work processes where we might be able to get by with one less employee in a certain office because of AI.
As we close, I always like to ask about what advice you'd offer your colleagues. You've been through this once with this legislation, and you'll be going at it again. Certainly other legislatures are grappling with this issue. What are your suggestions to those folks?
Well, I understand industry's perspective. The hands-off approach that they like just makes it easier for them. And I understand that. But if you're doing a bill like I am to protect citizens and it's regarding the deployment by government, I think that's something that you need to work with industry on. Industry initially said the states need to take this up, and then they changed their tune to, oh, let's just have a task force. Well, in my mind, the time for task force is over. We already have departments in our state who are beginning to use it, so we want to make sure the public is safeguarded. So the time for task force is over, and then I would say have conversations with industry, because as they point out, well, we don't like this part of your bill or we don't like that part of your bill. Do your research and work with NCSL, as a matter of fact, because you will see in other states that some of those same type of language is used in other bills that passed, and the industry did get on board with that state. So don't be fooled. Work with industry. And certainly I made a lot of amendments and changes to my bill because industry brought up some really great points, and they did need to be fixed, and we fixed them. So work with industry, but also realize that other states are passing things that will work. And you can no need to reinvent the wheel in that way.
Well, Senator, thanks for taking the time to walk us through your experience with this issue. I'm sure there are many more chapters to come. Thank you.
And I'd like to make one closing comment, if I may. We have to remember that AI, just like unmanned aircraft, is a tool, and there's nothing inherently evil with the tool. And I think the public is getting more and more comfortable with AI, but if we harness it for good and protect against bad actors, I think that we will see the benefits more and more. It's a brand new digital frontier, and so it's a little scary, and there are a lot of firsts happening out there. But I think if we all concentrate on doing what's best for the public, we can get this done and do it well.
Great. Thanks, Senator.
You're welcome.
I've been talking with Chelsea Canada from NCSL, Colorado Representative Manny Rutnow, and Alaska Senator Shelley Hughes about state legislative efforts to regulate AI to avoid harming consumers. Thanks for listening. You can check out all the podcasts from the National Conference of State Legislatures by searching for NCSL Podcasts wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast, Our American States, dives into some of the most challenging public policy issues facing legislators. On Across the Aisle, host Kelly Griffin tells stories of bipartisanship. And check out our special series, Building Democracy, on the history of legislatures.